There's that old Phil Hartman sketch on Saturday Night Live where he's like just the caveman lawyer. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel when it comes to like I'm just a lawyer. I'm not an economist, but I just know that when I go to the grocery store, things cost a lot more. So, Ranking Member Smith, would you like to talk about inflation, whether this is transitory? Because I know I'm feeling the pinch. My constituents are feeling the pinch. It's indisputable that we're paying more for goods we need every day. I yield to you.
Thank you, Representative. I can tell you my constituents don't believe it's transitory. And, you know, there was a lot of talk about the stock market. The people that I represent, they care about the supermarket, and they care about the prices at the supermarket. They don't care about what's going on Wall Street or the stock market. They care about what it's going to cost to put food on their table, clothes on their backs, and gasoline in their cars. And I do want to, before I hit more on the inflation, Representative, if you will allow me, I would like to address the prior comments by the chairman whenever he was saying that I was being dishonest. To say that the bill that's before us is $4.6 trillion. It is $4.6 trillion over 10 years if you don't allow the items that you had sunsetted at the year 22 to expire. And that's what it is. And so unless the Democrats want to allow the child tax credit to expire on the year 22, 1 year in, if they want to allow their Obamacare subsidies to expire, that means they would want the child tax credit to expire and the earned income tax credit. So my $4.6 trillion, Mr. Chairman, is in regards to allowing the proposal that's in this 1,700-page bill to last over 10 years. That's where $4.6 trillion comes in. It's not a dishonest number. Just listen to all my words, not just pick and choose some of them. But Representative, I will also add to it, inflation. Gas prices in my state are up 80% since January 20th. Meat is up 14%. Clothing is up 10%. That's not transitory. That is affecting real Americans every day. And I just, even the White House, the OMB, at the beginning of the year, before they passed the Biden bailout bill, projected inflation to be 2%. It's triple. It's 6%. On course to be the highest it's been in 40 years. Even the White House projected 2%, and now it's 6%. They were that far off. But it all happened after they started this reckless spending, and here's another $4.6 trillion that they're wanting to add fuel to the inflation fire.
Thanks, Ranking Member Smith. Ranking Member Brady, would you like to add anything on inflation and the purchasing power of everyday Americans?
Well, sure. And can I make this? I think Jason's point is really fair about the $4.6 trillion, because my Democrat colleagues did the same thing in tax reform. Our cost was 1.5 over 10 years. You made the case that if it was all expended, it would be 2.3. You all used that probably yesterday in your discussion. So I think Jason's point, fair to fair, apples to apples, the $4.6 trillion seems exactly accurate. So yeah, inflation, as you know, is on track to be the highest in 40 years right now. It is almost every month President Biden's been in office, prices have been risen higher than their paychecks have. And that isn't abating. In fact, a number of the big factors, as you know, inflation doesn't happen just because of cars or just because of gas. There's a bunch of stuff in there. What isn't in there yet is housing. You know, it's about an 18-month lag here. All those huge high increases in rents in home prices is going to start showing up December, January, February in a big way. And so inflation happens when expectations are there. Right now, consumer expectations, with the survey we saw just a few days ago, is at the highest it's been in a decade or more. So yeah, the worry, and no one wants this. No one wants inflation to get baked in to our economy. And that's why if you pour another $2 trillion or 4.6 into the economy, when you're also discouraging workers from reconnecting to a job, you have a recipe for very high inflation for a very long time.
Chairman Neal, I know you've been trying to get my attention, so of course I'll yield to you. And then, so I know you have something to say. I'm going to yield, but before I do, I wanted to ask you a question about the 3-pager. There's something about the IRS investments to close the tax gap. So I'm going to yield to you to address what I know you wanted to talk, but if you could hit on that too, I'd appreciate it. I'll yield.
Thanks to the gentleman. So Mr. Brady's correct. We did use $2.3 trillion, but interest rates were considerably different in 2017 than they are now, and the money for the tax cut in 2017 was borrowed. That's an important consideration. And Senator McConnell led the charge on the Senate side for that very reason. So let me just go back to this issue, and I'll come back to your IRS statement on inflation. Nobody sitting in this room today knows what inflation is going to look like in a year. But we do know the following. In history, nobody has changed the rules of supply and demand. And right now, the issue of demand is in front of us because much of the work that we did in a bipartisan manner put a lot of money into the pockets of consumers at the time, many of whom needed it, but others sat on it. American corporations right now are sitting on more money than they have in a long, long period of time. But demand right now, particularly as we run to the holiday season, part of this is the supply chain that we can't control because of the pandemic in places like Malaysia. What's happened with the Port of LA and the Port of Seattle and the Port of Boston, this has contributed to the challenge. So I do think that it's a fair statement to say none of us really know what an inflation trend is going to look like in short order. And you should know, I think Jay Powell has done a good job at the Federal Reserve Board. And IRS? You want me to talk about
So
that?
I just want to see if you want to expand upon the exact quote from the 3-pagers, IRS investments to close that tax gap. If you want to expand on that.
Yeah. So these are the numbers. From 2010 until 2020, IRS funding fell by 20%. You are much more likely to be audited if you claim the earned income tax credit than you are if you are paid in dividends and stock options. The reality is because of withholding, wage earners in America comply weekly at this extraordinary level of about 97% of compliance. Pretty wild when you stop and think of it. The average number for the rest of America is closer to 85, 86%. That tells you the story right there. People that go to work, the money is drawn down from your check every week or every month. So we think that by investing in new technology, new software, that we can discourage a lot of those who are beating the system currently. And we believe that the number is probably in that $400 billion range based upon an $80 billion investment. Technology, new personnel, and the last point, we think that the individuals that we're going to have to hire going into the future, they're going to have CPA background, tax lawyer backgrounds, because the people on the other side that are gaming the system, they have those abilities. So it's a good question.
Thanks, Chairman. I appreciate it. Ranking Member Brady, I know you're trying to get my attention. I was going to ask you if you had concerns about the IRS and also the how
30 seconds.
politics is going to come in.
30
Yeah, I'll give
seconds.
you. Yep.
So here's where Chairman Neal and I agree. People ought to pay their taxes, and we ought to close the tax gap. So the difference is, what is the tax gap, and how do we do it? Here's the problem. What's being touted as the tax gap is basically data from 7 years old, a couple local researches, and a bunch of guesses about cryptocurrency, foreign transactions, and concealed income. And I'm not convinced. I think these are funny numbers. Now, they're given to us, so you'll accept it. I think those numbers don't ring true. What I do think would ring true is if and we've introduced legislation, you may be on them, to require an accurate tax gap analysis each year, verified by Joint Committee on Taxation, telling us where the contributions and tax caps are so we can go after it together. So we think there's a much smarter way, especially without this IRS bank surveillance approach. But I think there's a common goal. There's just different approaches.
Ranking Member Brady, when we're talking about this and too with taxes as well, I'm still very concerned this is going to lead to tax increases on the working class and middle class. And the nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation found, and I'm quoting because I want to get this right, found that within 10 years, 66.3% of the corporate tax burden will be borne by the lower and middle class. And of course that makes sense because the corporations are going to pass that on to the consumer. Additionally, the left-leaning Tax Policy Center found that President Biden's plan would actually raise taxes on 75% of middle-class families next year, rising to 95% of of the middle-class families over the long term. Would you like to?
Yeah, so those were estimates of the Ways and Means bill that was marked up and passed out. It included corporate tax rate increases and the tobacco tax, about $100 billion on that as well. So we believe that there will be tax increases from that minimum corporate tax rate, but that hasn't been assessed yet. To be fair, again, that hasn't been vetted, so we don't know the impact there. We do know increases on the middle class, low income from the tobacco taxes. The other thing that worries me as well, too, is the international tax laws. You think that wouldn't have an impact on necessarily on middle class workers, but when you become so much less competitive than the rest of the world, when you see investments in jobs and research driven overseas, my view is it definitely has an impact on those workers.
Thanks, Ranking Member Brady. Ranking Member McMorris-Rodgers, so as you know, I'm from southwestern Pennsylvania, big oil and gas state, and particularly in my part of the region. I'm really worried about taxing natural gas. And if you look at just in Pennsylvania alone, your average family saves roughly $1,200 a year just in lower energy costs. And just as Ranking Member Brady was talking about the corporate taxes, that is transitory because corporations are going to pay that off. They're going to have the consumers pay that. They're also going to have savings when the corporations, manufacturers reduce energy costs because there'll be savings. So what I'm trying to say is not only does the average family save more because of low cost of energy, they're also paying less if we didn't have these other issues going on in the economy for goods because it costs less to manufacture them because energy prices are low. Do you have concerns that if we start taxing oil and gas, that will also have an impact on working and middle-class families?
Absolutely, yes. Definitely have concerns. We're heading into winter. There's growing concerns right here in the United States of America around reliability, affordability. It makes no sense right now that we're shutting down American energy. The provisions in this bill around the methane tax, the natural gas tax, it is estimated it's going to be tens of thousands of jobs that it would be cost right here in the United States of America, and that it would increase natural gas bills this winter by 34%. That is on families all across this country. We already saw that the administration shut down the Keystone Pipeline day one. That was 10,000 jobs, and the estimates are that this will be additional tens of thousands of jobs. You know, we had a natural gas employee, union worker out of California testify. Oh my God, if I turn on, thank you. So oftentimes I hear from the majority that all of these jobs are going to be able to transition, right? We had a union worker from California testify in March. He said, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. It actually makes my skin crawl, was his words, because he said, you know, we finally reached a point where we're energy independent, and now we're going to shut that down, shut down American energy. We're going to go all in on wind and solar. That is, those supply chains all come from China. We're going to turn our back on American ingenuity, technology that's leading the world right now. We are leading the world in bringing down carbon emissions because of technology innovation, carbon capture, carbon sequestration. We're leading the world, and it's going to cost jobs. It's going to cost us American leadership. It jeopardizes the progress, the leadership that we are making. It's going to hurt the economy, and it's going to hurt jobs. It's going to hurt jobs.
And you hit it. The great irony is we're actually the only nation that signed on the Paris Climate Agreement that's actually reduced our carbon emissions. And when we talk about carbon emissions, we can talk about it all we want, but even if we reduce to zero, which I don't think is possible at least in the midterm, you still have China putting out 27% of the world's global emissions. What's worse is China is not reducing that. They're actually going to increase their emissions. It was frankly on the front page of the Wall Street Journal today. Interesting read. They're not even going to be reducing until the mid-2030s. So we can do all we want until we address China, and we have real partners. it doesn't do anything. And then as far as the electric vehicles, I know there was talks about that. I just wanted to put that in perspective as well. So the truth of the matter is that electricity still needs to be made somehow. I often say the drywall in your garage, when you plug in the Tesla, that drywall is not generating energy. So when you look at it, realistically, electric cars will generate just 23% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than a gas-powered car. So if you take that to all the cars in the world, let's say we made them all EVs, you'd only have a 1.8% decline in total emissions. So we're shifting all this, just in the motor industry, all this to EVs for a 1.8% reduction. And again, we're not addressing China and those issues. So with that, for the sake of time, I'm going to yield back. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.